Nirvana's MTV Unplugged performance is widely considered one of the band's most iconic shows, yet the night before the show there was some uncertainty as to whether or not it would be a good idea to do Unplugged. Ernie Bailey, one of Nirvana's guitar techs, spoke to me about this. In this video, I'm going to show you a clip from my interview with Ernie where he discusses why there was this feeling of uncertainty amongst the band prior to Unplugged. Furthermore, I'm also going to show you a clip from my interview with Jack Endino where he discusses Nirvana's history with the song In the Pines, also known as Where Did You Sleep Last Night. Where Did You Sleep Last Night from Unplugged is one of their most famous live performances of a song. But prior to that, there actually was another recording the band did of that song that is much less known. I'm going to be showing you a clip where Jack talks about this. But first, let's start with Ernie Bailey. I was actually just going to ask you about Unplugged. I was going to ask if you were involved, but you just said you were. What was that show like? Like just prepping for it and then the actual show itself? How was that experience for you?
At first, I think it was kind of fun because we were going to be doing something we'd never done before. And then it did take some logistical effort to make the equipment happen, because Kurt did have some sort of abstract ideas about what he wanted to do with the guitar and things like that, and it's just not as easy and conventional as like, okay, here's an acoustic guitar that has a built-in pickup, let's just plug it in straight, let's go. So he had just a lot of things that he wanted to do that took a little bit of ironing out. So there was that, but I think the biggest thing was that the night before we did Unplugged, the day before, we went out to New Jersey and we held rehearsals out there. And just seeing that instilled a lot of doubt that it was a good idea to do the show, because it just wasn't moving along very fast. And, often, like you start working on something, your first pass at it's going to be a little rough, a little sloppy, and then it gets a little better, and then a little better. And then with most groups, it sounds like it's going to sound pretty quick, and it just was not happening. It just seemed like as nightfall was approaching, it was just like, oh my God, this is something that should not happen tomorrow. This is going to be awful. So really, I remember how I felt like going into the day, and it wasn't until they ran through The Man Who Sold the World where you heard it. And I think that I read something recently where Chris said that he didn't feel like he had it locked in, and he wound up just staying up all night, and I think inviting people into his hotel room. So they continued to practice, long after the fact, long beyond like what any of us had seen. So I was really surprised the next day to see what I saw, and it wasn't until hearing Man Who Sold the World that I realized that this could potentially be great.
It's amazing. Well, it's one of their most legendary performances. It's so cool hearing that, there was that uncertainty beforehand and then it kind of just came together like that. Were the meat puppets, were they there for the rehearsal the day prior?
Oh, yeah.
How did they?
Yeah, definitely.
That feeling of, I'm not sure if this is going to go well, and then they nail it. Was that a common occurrence with Nirvana performances, or was that just for Unplugged?
I think really just Unplugged, because everything else was something they'd done for years. The live electric show was something where, there wasn't really like a rigid, at least in the earlier years and all the way up until the Utero tour, it wasn't so scripted to where you ever really knew what was going to happen. And especially in 92 and 93, the shows were so far apart that there wasn't any sort of like a baseline normal. So you go in and the shows were really kind of all over the place. And some of them were really interesting. Some of them were terrible. And some of them were incredible. You never knew what you were going to see, how it was going to end, how it was going to flow.
And there's one more question about a specific concert. So there was, I think it was Top of the Pops in the UK. Nirvana deliberately butchered Smells Like Teen Spirit. Yeah, were you there for that gig?
Not at that one. I remember seeing it though.
What was your reaction to it?
Oh, I couldn't be happier.
Well, what motivated them to do that?
I want to say that was the thing where they were required to lip sync, or at least partially lip sync. I think that was one where it was lip synced, with the exception of the vocals. So that was one where they didn't honestly even have to be playing. So in order to draw attention to that, because it is sort of this thing that's seen as being a little bit phony, and I think that some bands don't like this idea of going in there and phoning that in to where they're up there pretending to play when they're really not. And so, I think more or less it's just their sense of humor where what's the funniest thing we could do right now, and this is it. So,
is there any other funny on stage experience you remember from Nirvana?
Oof. I honestly should have made a list. It's really hard to zero in on anything. They appear as random thoughts, on occasion. There's, stuff that you can and can't share, and it's like, I think the stuff that you do remember, it's unbelievably hilarious, but it's just not ready for prime time.
When people think of Where Did You Sleep Last Night, they often think of the MTV Unplugged version, but you actually recorded, from what I understand, the original one that Mark Lanegan and Kurt Cobain did together. Is this correct?
Correct.
And what was the story there exactly?
I may get this wrong because nobody has asked me about this for a long time. At some point, there was a session where Mark Lanegan and Mark Pickrell, the drummer from the Screaming Trees, and Kurt Cobain and Chris Novoselic were going to come in and record a side project that they'd been doing where they supposedly were writing some songs together. Now, they booked the time, and then apparently they never wrote any songs together, or as Kurt said, well, we wrote some songs together, but we forgot them all. I don't know if it ever happened, actually. Mm-hmm. But he said, what we're going to do instead is we're just going to record some Lead Belly tunes. And I thought, okay. So they came in and recorded, and I think this is when that session took place. They recorded Where Did You Sleep Last Night? They recorded Ain't It a Shame, which is on the box set, and something called Grey Goose, which I had no memory of for years and years because it doesn't have a vocal. It's literally one riff over and over again. It's not very exciting. But there it was on the master tapes when we finally pulled it out. They just, for some reason, nobody bothered singing on it that day. And it ended up on the box set, I think. That was all they managed to do that day. One song with Mark singing, one song with Kurt singing, and an instrumental. And I asked them, what do I put on the log sheet? And they said, I'll call it The Jury. I said, okay. So, but it wasn't really a band. But it was the only time I got to record Mark Pickrell drumming with Chris and Kurt. And I think that is where that version of Where Do You Sleep Last Night came from. Because sometime after that, when I was recording Mark Lanegan's first solo record, I think the subject of that song came up and we decided to just put that on the end of it. That's why that song is on the winding sheet. There's another song on the winding sheet called Down in the Dark, where we got Kurt to come in and do a backing vocal, and I'm doing a little electric guitar on it as well. Probably the only thing on which I'm playing guitar with Kurt singing that exists, which is interesting. I haven't really thought about that. Yes, but that was the version, that arrangement of the song, I think, is what inspired Kurt to do the song at the Unplugged session much later.
Really?
Probably so. Although really, Kurt was present when we recorded the Mark Lanegan version, so, I'm sure they arranged it together. Anyway, this is all speculation.
So for you, when you listen to, I guess, the Unplugged version, how does it compared to the versions that you were involved with? Like, what do you think of it?
The arrangement is the same. The difference really is the instrumentation and the vocal. He sings it very similar to how Mark Lanegan sings it, but, he puts the sort of Kurt passion into it, really.
Yeah.
Different players, different instrumentation. I think the only thing in common is, Kurt's playing acoustic on it,